A car in South Africa become obsolete? Well, of course not, but we do have a long way to go before everyone is using public transport. Minibus taxis dominate South Africa's public transport system. 15 million people use them every day, but as you know, they are dangerous. The metro rail system hasn't been maintained and can barely keep up with the number of passengers. How do we get our public system working better and on a par with international networks? We're going to be putting those questions to our panel, but first we head over to London and New York to see how their transport system works and if there is anything we can learn. London is home to one of the world's most extensive public transport systems. The network runs both under and above ground. Recent research also shows a 22% hike in passengers on buses. For more on this, let's go to our London correspondent, Ollie Barrett. So more people, Ollie, are taking public transport. It seems everyone, obviously not the Queen though, is using it. Why?
Well, part of the reason for that is that the roads in the British capital are just gridlocked quite a lot of the time because of the sheer weight of traffic, but also there is the congestion charge as well, which has been in place in the British capital for years now, which costs you 10 quid or so, so a couple of £100 a day every time you drive into the centre of London. So for many people, they've abandoned their cars when it comes to driving around the centre of town, and they will find it much easier to get in on the underground or on the bus. Those are the two main methods of transport in London for commuters and people going about their daily business. The car has just become too complicated, too expensive, and will take you a long time to get around if you get stuck in one of those traffic jams. The roads are so gridlocked at times that if a traffic jam builds up in one place or an accident takes place somewhere, it can lead to a huge knock-on effect for a large area around that point. So the tube, pretty cheap compared to coming in by car, much more reliable, will often get you where you need to be much more quickly.
And Ollie, it's certainly integrated, isn't it? I mean, there isn't really a status issue to taking public transport. So many people use it.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And also we have a system called the Oyster card system here, where you top up a card, or you can use your bank card as well. And you can hop from a bus to a train, some trains anyway, to an underground train. You can hop on one of the tram systems and use that same payment card, and it'll be capped at a certain amount of money each day. So you're not always knocking up extra fees, but the numbers are pretty vast, and London has a long experience, of course, of dealing with these huge numbers of people. The Tube, which opened in 1863, has 1.37 billion in terms of annual passenger numbers across 402 kilometres of line. There are 42 kilometres of new tunnels being built under London at the moment. They will open this year. The Crossrail Elizabeth line, which effectively adds another tube network under London, linking east and west. And in terms of buses, you mentioned earlier, there are 9,300 buses over 675 routes in London, 19,000 bus stops. Over 90% of Londoners live within 400 metres of one.
All right, thank you for that, Ollie Barrett. Well, from London to New York, an estimated 1.5 billion commuters use the New York subway every year. The city, like London, has an extensive public transport network. William Denzer joins us from New York to explain what works there and what doesn't. William, how effective is it there? I mean, is it easier than driving?
Unique example in the United States. Now, as a national average, 76% of people in the country choose to take their own car to get to work. In New York City, however, that's down to just 6.6%, so a marked difference. Some 5.5 million people choose to take New York's subways every single workday. Now, that estimates to around 59% of workers in Manhattan choosing to take public transit. Now, that being said, New York's public transit has a huge array of issues that it faces. Despite it being so popular, perhaps it can be seen as a victim of its own success. the governor of New York State, Andrew Cuomo, last June declared a state of emergency because the subway systems were struggling so much. Just to put that into context, in 2012, there were reported 20,000 delays per month. But looking at just May of last year, there were 67,500 delays. So while it's incredibly popular, incredibly well used, public transit in New York certainly has a huge array of issues as well.
Thank you very much for that. Well, with me to talk about this is South African National Taxi Association President Philip Taibosh, Trevor Fowler, formerly with the City of Joburg and now with Wits University as Director of Executive Education at Wits School of Governance, and Transport Minister Blade Nzimande joins us from our Cape Town studios. Very good to have you all with us. Minister, let me start off with you. Do you think South Africa's transport system is failing the people here?
Is that meant for me, Jane?
Yes, it is.
Oh, yeah, no, sorry. Yeah, thank you very much. Good evening to you, your viewers and your listeners. Of course, you know, I will be the first to admit that our transport system is not up to the standard that we would like to wish it to be. But that should not detract from the kind of investment that has been made, especially by the democratic government since 1994, to try and put the pieces together. For instance, we've got new legislation, which is the National Land Transport Act, which actually regulates the public transport system. We've actually invested in other modes of public transport, like, for instance, now the bus rapid transport system. And, of course, we've been subsidizing sections of buses that are actually operating. And our laws, by the way, allows also for cooperation amongst the different spheres of government towards providing reliable transport. The big challenge is how do we then put these pieces all together such that they are able to work together. They are actually there's still a lot of unevenness. There's still a lot of investment that we actually need to put in. Apart from the challenges, you say, with the minibus taxi industry, you know, of ending violence, making it a safer space, but also for communities to be part of government's effort to build a safer public transport system, like we should protect destruction of property, the burning of trains, so that we are actually able to work towards what you were talking about, for instance, which you were showing in London and many other European cities. And we think that South Africa is quite capable of reaching that, but it's still going to take a bit of time and a bit of effort on the part of everybody.
Okay, Philip Taibosh, do you think the transport industry is failing South Africans? Do you think there's more that could be done?
I don't think that the transport industry in South Africa is failing the South African public. The only thing is, which I believe in, it's to level the playing fields. To level the playing fields. And when I'm referring to leveling the playing fields, and I think I must agree with what the minister is saying, to say that we must look at pieces of legislation. What is that can be done to sort of equal the transport benefits? For instance, like if you take since 1994, actually I must take you prior to 1994, that the bus industry was subsidized in those years, and the taxi industry still remains unsubsidized. And in our case, we have never requested for subsidies for individual companies within the taxi industry. We have requested government, and I'm sure the minister would agree with me, that we've always requested for the subsidization of the commuters within the transport system in the country, so that when a passenger goes into a bus and the passenger must have a choice of transportation. That's what we have been advocating for, and we believe that our government should work on that. But I'm not going to deny that at least a small attempt was made by our government, but that particular attempt was also ripped off by the motor manufacturing companies, the dealerships, That is with the taxi recapitalization program.
Okay, we'll get into taxis in more detail a little later on. Mr. Vala, I mean, what do you make of the industry and if it's doing a good enough job for South Africans?
Well, I think, Jane, thank you for the question. One of the key areas that I think we struggle with, which is something that the Minister Nzimande mentioned, which is really the mode transfer between the various modes of transport. So you have the taxis, you have trains, you have buses, etc. And you can't really transfer from one to the other by paying one price and then being transferred to the other. And so some of the interventions are really to look at that. And I think the BRT is across the country, and particularly in Johannesburg when I was city manager, one of the areas that we looked at was really how do you partner with the other industry. So in particular in this case, the BRT in Johannesburg is a partnership with the taxi industry. So
and that's the buses, but operating in a relatively small area, right?
Yes, and so the buses are operated by a company that is made up of taxi operator owners. Many of them are operator owners, some are from the bus companies that were on the route, and it's really an attempt to try to get the various modes to work together, and also to improve the safety on the route and the speed on the route, etc.
Can I jump in very quickly, because we've got a caller, Charles from Pretoria, who is a train user with a question. Charles, go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. How are you doing?
Good, thank you, Charles.
Great, thank you. You know, PRASA is failing us, the commuters. I'm using the train from Germiston and Pretoria each and every day. Each and every time before we reach Night Station, immediately after Germiston, the train stops. Plus minus 10 minutes, 20 minutes. And after that, each and every time when you towards the Pretoria station, which is Fountain, in the middle of nowhere, the train just stuck there for 1 hour. People get late. Some people get fired from works. They get written warnings. So this is frustrating us. And each and every weekend, they're hiring the buses, city to city. They're taking us from Pretoria station to St. Chiron, telling us they are fixing the lines between St. Chiron and Pretoria station. But come Monday and Friday, we're facing the very same problem. Even today, we had the same problem. Okay, so Charles, I need the minister to please, minister, before people start burning tires, just fix this thing. Please, minister.
Okay, thank you, Charles. Minister, go ahead.
Yes, Jane, thank you very much. You know, I must say I do agree with Charles, unfortunately, you know, that we've got huge challenges in terms of our rail system. Right now, Jane, I'm from a meeting with the board of PRASA and the interim group CEO. We're discussing this thing. They were presenting to me a turnaround strategy, because my mandate to them is that, look, we know that sorting out the rail passenger system is not going to be an overnight thing, but there are certain things that actually needs to be done now in order to stabilize, which means, amongst other things, appointing senior managers at PRASA. Just about everybody is acting there. Secondly, PRASA has got billions of rands of unspent money that are supposed to be invested into infrastructure, whether it's rolling stock and a lot of other things, and it's money that needs to be spent carefully so that we are able to revitalize the rail system. I do agree it's unacceptable that South Africa's workers are subjected to delayed trains. Of course, part of turning around the system, as I have said, as government, we are aware of what we've got to do, but also we are calling upon our communities that no matter how frustrated they can be, they should be partners, you know. We should actually make sure that we don't burn trains, we don't destroy property, and also identify people who are vandalizing our system in terms of copper theft and so on. We are not saying that's the only problem, but unless we partner, we are not going to be able to actually tackle this. But government is very determined that we need to rebuild and give new confidence to our rail system.
I mean, you touched on an important point there, Mr. Taibosh, what the Minister was saying about giving people confidence. And the thing is, South Africans don't have confidence, do they? I mean, so much money has been skimmed off the top, so much has been held back due to corruption, that South Africa could be a lot further than it is right now if the government had been committed to improving it.
I think, Jane, you are absolutely right that for the government to get the confidence of the people, it's when government is seriously delivering, and particularly in the areas where there is need. And as you look presently into the country in South Africa, there is an over-concentration in the urban areas in the country. And you found that there is always a wanting when it comes to the infrastructure in the communities down there who are really in need of these particular services. I'm very confident that if we were to sit down, and I believe the Minister is planning to have a transport summit, if we were going to sit down, we may be able to advise each other on the way forward in ensuring that from the transportation point of view, even on the roads itself, what is it that needs to be done? I think there is an opportunity whereby we could engage and we could come up with proposals which can make South Africa a better transport country.
Let's hear what some South Africans had to say. They've got, differing views about what it is that we are lacking and what it is that we need. Let's hear what they had to say.
You can see maybe the cost-wise, it's costing a lot to travel with taxis because they're not getting subsidies like the buses and your trains and everything. I think government should try and look into this taxi industry in particular because that's the one that people like us from townships will use mostly, and it's the most accessible one.
I think the public transport helps a lot of people in South Africa, especially taxis, because a lot of people rely on taxis to get from point A to B, except for the fact that taxis are dangerous.
Public transport ke dinamela fela ka gore a ke na choice gona lo re o seng o humana ke o mashele a tshwantse yena a re lead a re nametše maybe go be extra batho ba i5 ka mara taxi extra 5 people ka ra quantum so ebe kgonega gore go di plekeng tša rena na ke dula side la midrand a rena di bus go re be le di bese and o namela taxi o namela ka ro o batla o namela taxi ba ba yang bese ba beseng ra hloka bese le rena ra e batla di taxi tsona vele a rena choice re tshwantse re no di namela.
And we'll be back with more on what can be done to make our transport system more effective after this very short break.